Welcome back to another episode of Contractor Secrets with Trade Business Accountants. My name's Warren Peachey, and today we have on a guest that I'm very excited to be speaking with, and that guest is Michelle Cirson, Managing Director of Tricks of Your Trade. Michelle is a construction adjudicator, a lawyer, a seasoned consultant when it comes to providing commercial management, contract and debt recovery, and advice to Australian subcontractors. She's the person you call when you know a dispute's on the cards, then you don't quite need a lawyer yet, but you need your contract administered correctly in case things go very south. So Michelle, welcome to the show, and thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you, Warren. I'm really looking forward to it.
That's terrific. So what we'd like to do is start by saying, what got you into contract law and your background, and just how did you get to this position that you are now, looking after subcontractors? You know, what was that journey like for you?
Yeah, so it's an interesting path. I actually started out working client-side project management in government. So I was up in the little mining town of Moranbah. We used to get funding agreements from federal, state government, BMA coal, all of that, and I'd have to build these community facilities. So we would have often lots and lots of contracts that we had to comply with just to spend the money, but then we'd also be tendering for the builder. So that's where I started out in construction. That's where I got really passionate about building. And actually, I think a lot of the reasons that people get into construction is that tangible satisfaction of seeing buildings that are there now that weren't there before, that they were involved with. So that's where it all started with me. I left government to work for the Builders Camp, and I started studying law actually because I wanted to prosecute politicians for misuse of public funds, not necessarily because of that particular council, but because I could see that there were inefficiencies. So that's why I started studying law. And when I started working for builders in construction, I started to realise that there was much better things to sort of tackle in the world than that. So I've always wanted to change the world, but now I've just decided we probably just should keep it to change Australia because the world's pretty big. But when I started working for builders, they were in financial crisis, a lot of them, and they had a lot of things going wrong where they would have to short pay subbies, they had to triage their situation just to stay alive. And I had to be the person in a lot of instances who were short paying people. I had to have those conversations, look those subbies in the eye. And yeah, it sparked a passion in me to help those guys because in a lot of instances, things could have been avoidable. And I would see them come to the law firm way too late. And there was this gap in the middle where if they just sent one email, or if they just put one thing in writing, or they just sent one notice, then they wouldn't be, in Armageddon land. So that's how it all started.
Oh, excellent. It's terrible, some of the landscape that, tradesmen, most of the time they weren't that great at school, so they're good with their hands, they get into the trades. And from my experience over the years is most tradesmen are just really helpful people. They want to do the right thing, so they would just rather see the job progress.
Yes.
We'll worry about the paperwork later.
Yeah.
And look, I'll put my hand up. I've been in that situation. You're very trusting in a subcontract model. You want to do the right thing for the client. But yeah, it can get you in a lot of hot water. Michelle, obviously there's a lot going on in construction right now. We're coming out of COVID. There's a labour shortage, a change of government, material shortages from, the war in Ukraine, and a lot of things that are happening around the place, all kinds of different things. What, in your opinion, what is the biggest challenges subcontractors are facing right now, particularly working with builders?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So it's a little bit like when you go to the doctor and you've got symptoms, but really it's actually an illness deep inside that's causing the symptoms. So I see sort of like the material price increases and the instability in the industry at the moment. It's always, for me, boiled down to sort of four main things. And the first of these are our content pillars, as well as what we talk about. You see me talking about on LinkedIn all the time, is price wars and subbies who will just completely undercut each other's prices to win work. So it creates a bigger systemic problem in the industry. Unfair contract terms, which even the Australian standard conditions of contract are heavily weighted in favour of the builder. And a lot of lawyers will say they're fair. I completely disagree. And then you've got security of payment, which has been an age-old problem for legislators to get right. And every single state and territory in the country at the moment has something a little bit different for security of payment because they all think they know better. But underlying all of that is this blue-collar discrimination and this power imbalance. And it's a lot like you were saying, how subbies are good blokes who want to help and, let's get on with it, let's muck in, get the job done. And they also really want to provide really good customer service to their builder. So in their mind, their value proposition is really good price, which is why they keep discounting, and get on site as quick as you possibly can and do it as fast as you can. But the belts and braces are missing. So in my mind, if we can tackle unfair contract terms and security of payment from a legal foundation so that we can help the country as a whole, I think everybody will be in a lot better stance. But subbies need to come together and deal with this price wars problem.
For sure. We've seen a real shift in builders. Builders years ago were carpenters, they had the tool belt on, the whole lot. And the landscape, I call them executive builders now, because, builders are more project managers, lawyers, they're really professional, and they're just shifting that risk downwards through contractual terms. And the level of sophistication in building firms now, particularly when you get to the tier 2, tier 1s, just with everything, safety, compliance, project management, communication management. The bar has lifted that high now, that subcontractors, if they're not willing to tool up into those those skill sets, those professional skill sets, you get left behind, and then the carnage happens in the industry, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is really tough.
Michelle, signing big contracts, risk versus reward, knowing when to stand your ground or negotiate disagreements with terms and all that sort of thing. Let's talk about this one.
Yeah, so this is my favourite topic ever. So along with price wars, this is something the subbie's got to take the bull by the horns with. If every single subcontractor asked for just one change, imagine what would happen with builders. And we're seeing it now with this material price increase. I'm seeing builders who used to have the worst contracts ever completely crossing out liquidated damages. I got a builder's contract yesterday, doesn't even have LDs in there anymore. So now's the time to get some traction on this. In terms of risk versus reward, I see a lot of subcontractors who are getting trade business coaching, and I am a huge fan of trade business coaching. I think if you stepped out of the tools and you think that you know how to run a business, I mean, I was the same myself. I had no idea what I was doing with my business. It took me 5 years to work out what to do. And that was because I got a coach. But when you're growing your revenue for the sake of growing your revenue, and in your world, Warren, it'd be translating back to that profit, that GP number, you need to know whether you're exponentially growing your risk as well, because you have to sign more contracts more frequently, or bigger and scarier contracts. And that involves more customers or people you've never worked with before. So there is a balance to be struck. Now, knowing which terms to cross out and which ones to argue about. One thing subbies all have heard of is the hierarchy of controls in safety. If you've done your white card, you should know about the hierarchy of controls. And if you can just condense it down to what is the likelihood of this happening and what are the consequences? And from a practical perspective, what can we do to put belts and braces in place? It doesn't have to be a lawyer redrafting your contract. In fact, I probably get shot for saying this by somebody, but I don't typically recommend that the lawyer does the negotiating, because they'll tank your deal 10 times over. And you're actually better off getting some training, some education on what these contract terms mean. And in a practical sense, can you comply with those obligations? Because I've seen subbies spend 20 grand with lawyers, redrafting clauses, sending it back to the builder. And the lawyer's actually fighting for things that are never going to happen to that guy because his trade's just not applicable to what's going to happen there. So it's about doing your Q&A of the contract. Please check that your business name's right and your ABN's right, and the builder's got a license if he needs one, and that your license is written on there if you need one. And your contract price, check your drawing register, for heaven's sake. That's not rocket science. And if you do those things alone, typically, and the construction program with your start and finish dates, those are things that anybody can do. Anybody who can read can do those things. And then if you're looking at something and there's a clause in your contract, you're thinking, I don't know what that means, that's when you pick up the phone and get some help.
Absolutely. And, what I've seen in the past is, sometimes you'd start on a handshake deal and you get going. Nowadays, there's 300-page contracts. And the liquidated damages ones is a really interesting, they're even bringing it down to sub parcels now. And, just going in. So it's one of those things where you're negotiating a contract and pricing and whatnot, is you get right to the stage where they want to win, that pre-engagement checklist, and then they present the contract. So you're pretty much, 9/10 of the way there. And that's when you bring out the red pen and, just capping liquidated damages to 5% of contract value and just those sort of things. And, realistic, as you said, is timelines and program and drawing registers and, generally in in line with different things. And yeah, there's a lot to be said for just those small markups and changes that can occur that anyone can really do to mitigate their risk. The next one I'd like to talk about is, tying into that, the questionable reason you see builders giving subcontractors, and this is about, you mentioned earlier, is about payments, putting payments on hold and variation management, all these sort of things. How should a subby deal with that from the outset? So, we've got to, okay, we started the job, there's a contract in place, you might have made some small amendments, but executing the works and dealing on a day-to-day basis with the builder. What does that look like? How do you see that about this payment process?
Yeah, so there's a balance to be struck, because we don't want to burn the world and burn relationships. So if there's a hoop that you can jump through that's relatively fine, it's not going to damage your position, I always say, look, let's just jump through the hoop. And a good example is the statutory declaration. So you will be contractually obliged to do some things that the security of payment law doesn't require you to do to have a valid payment claim. So an example of that is if you're a subcontractor and you give a payment claim, you won't have an invalid claim under security of payment because you didn't attach a statutory declaration. But the contract might have 40 things that you've got to attach to have a valid payment claim. When you do your contract review, you need to cross out anything that is not applicable for your trade. And if you don't do that, then you might end up in a situation where the builder's going to make your life an absolute nightmare administratively. So in terms of some examples of those things, probably the best one that I've ever seen was an auto reply on a builder's email account that said, your payment claim is invalid because you didn't submit it on the day stated in the contract. And they had an auto reply set up that would go every day except for the 25th of the month. And if you know anything about security of payment, if you put a payment claim in before your reference date comes around, it won't be valid. But if you put it in on or after your reference date, you'll have a valid payment claim. And in any event, builders have to respond with a payment schedule now in some states. And if they don't, there can be penalties. So we get this auto reply. And the first thing that I would say in my lawyer mind is it your intention that this is a payment schedule for the purposes of the legislation? And suddenly you'll get this flurry of activity, but we don't want to be lighting fires. So if you can, in a practical sense, put your payment claim in on the 25th of the month and you want to jump through that hoop to keep everyone happy, then by all means do it. But no one's coming to work on Christmas Day to stick their payment claim in on that day. And the builder needs to understand that you know what you're talking about. So we start those conversations in the tender process. You need to be writing on your quote what your terms and conditions are. Even if the CA doesn't read them, in the post-tender meeting, you can say, well, hey, hang on a second, look, we put that on our quote. And you have that conversation. Another one where people will constantly get the response from a builder when you say, hey, can I have this change in the contract? He says, no, you can't have any changes. You said you submitted your tender and agreed to our terms when you submitted our tender. And I always say to the subby, is he asking you to change the price? Is he asking you for a discount? And the subby goes, of course he is. I'm like, well, if the builder can change the price after the quote goes in, why can't you change the contract terms? You haven't signed anything at this point. So the key message, and just to slip that one, and I know I'm going off topic in terms of talking about that, the key thing is just not to start work until got the contract squared away. But the business with the silly reasons for not paying you, we've heard everything under the sun that you can possibly imagine. You didn't attach your payment, you didn't attach your statutory declaration, you didn't CC in this person on that email, you didn't use our template. All those things won't invalidate your payment claim under security of payment laws. You need to, if this is a problem for you and you're not being paid because of this, and they're going to try and kick the can down the road another 30 days, it's a bigger problem. It's a systematic cultural problem with that builder, and it could be an indication that the builder doesn't have the money.
It's interesting. I got stuck on this, the payment claim date, where, you know, you're going back and forward with contracts, and I'd been working with these guys for a number of years, and it was always the 25th, the date. And then on a review, because we checked it, but on a review that they sent back, they changed it to the 22nd. And
Yeah.
I had 600 grand in that claim for that month at the time. And yeah, it was invalid because we put it on the 24th, I think it was, you know, got it over to them, but because we'd missed the 22nd, they just wouldn't pay for it. So it was like 90 days before we end up getting the money on that particular one. So yeah,
no,
coming back to that one about the, you know, changing the contract. It's like, you know, you might have a Queensland branch, but oh no, you know, their headquarters in Canberra, we can't make any changes. It's, you know, they won't and they use the head office sort of scenario that no, we can't change the contract and whatnot. But yeah,
no, it's not true. They'll change it if they want to. In fact, they change it all the time, and it just depends on how much leverage you've got in terms of your trade and how hard it is for them to let that trade, and what their urgency is as well, because yeah, it'll come down to whether or not the contracts administrator wants to go and do all of the trade letting process again.
Yeah. Just on that, variation. It's one of those things that, you know, you've got, you're doing some work, the main contract, and then a variation comes through. Where do you sit on that sort of scenario that, you know, they've done that variation work in that month and they've got a sign off, for example, like a field diary note or whatever sign off, and then they go, oh no, that's still got to be processed and claimed and it's not there, and they just like kick the can down the road on variations right to the end. What's the way that you would say to approach that subject?
Yeah, so really good question. I actually did a webinar on this yesterday, which is on our website in the webinar gallery if anyone wants to watch it. But getting paid for variations is a process. And the first thing you need to do is, when you're reviewing a contract, is you need to make sure that you've got the right to decline any variation that they have not approved your price in writing prior. And then you need to have really good site records of what you actually do. You need to understand how you're valuing your variation. So your contract terms will say how a variation is to be valued. If you put in your payment claim, attach your variation direction with the quote approved, and then your day dockets evidencing the hours, and then the price worked out exactly in accordance with the contract, 9 times out of 10, the builder won't be clever enough to give you a good enough answer in your payment schedule about why they're not paying it. Or if they don't give you a payment schedule at all, you can suspend work. So you need to be really clear in terms of your communication at post-tender. We won't be doing any variations unless we've got a written direction and a pre-approved quote, and that's going to have to go into the contract. And you'll be thanking me for that, because there'll be no surprises. So you can rest assured that unless you've seen it, we're not claiming it. And that's how you sell it to the CA, because he's worried about his budget. And then you need to make sure that when you put it in your payment claim, you put it in correctly. So your payment claim needs to properly describe the variation. Don't just put variations June 22. You need to actually say what you did, attach all the supporting information. And then the last little tip, and this is like a 30-second download of our webinar, but the last little tip is that you need to read your payment schedules in detail. A lot of subcontractors will get the remittance advice, marry it up with their payment claim and go, yep, nothing to see here, I'm getting paid what I claimed. But if you look into your payment schedule, oftentimes the builder is certifying a larger amount of contract sum and then putting a note next to your variation saying to be assessed next month, paid on account. That's not an answer. And you need to go back and say, well, why do you need to assess it next month? I've got the variation quote in writing. I've given you my day dockets. I valued it in accordance with the contract. You should be saying yes to this now, and then get the money quarantined in your bank account. So it really does come down to harnessing the leverage of the moment on site, because there will be probably a 15-minute window where the foreman says, mate, can you do this A, B, and C urgently? and you say your guys need to be trained to say, can you just get the office to send something to our office? We need to have that in writing first. We're not allowed to do anything before we get it in writing. And so the foreman, I've been this CA on site, Warren, where the foreman comes up to the crib hut and goes, what's this BS? And I need this guy to do it right now. And now all of a sudden, instead of you running around trying to do paperwork after the fact, you've got the foreman working for you and advocating for you to get you your approval. And once you get your approval, then you should sail through the debt recovery process if you need to use it. But what inevitably happens is that CA won't pick on you this month, because guaranteed there'll be a renderer or a painter or someone else down the chain that's not done their paperwork that he can pick on.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? It comes back down to the level of sophistication that the guys on site, the foreman, that what's in scope, what's out of scope, when do I go, oh, that's a red flag, I need to get something in writing to cover the boss's position, that type of thing. Yeah. I guess this is the next question I wanted to talk to you about is what's the risk that you see of actually starting works without contracts? I'm a big believer of, I've spent 30 odd years in relationship contracting, like relationship building, and I place a lot of emphasis on that. And I must say, I've started $1 million contracts on a handshake to get going. In the past, I'd be a little hesitant today to do that. Although, most people still, to keep the project going, keep the relationship there, see it as an important element of that relationship with who they're working for. But what is the real risk there in actually starting work without a contract?
Yeah. So the risk is all yours, and you're handing your leverage on a silver platter to the builder the moment you do it. So there's, again, this little moment of a window of opportunity where the closer it gets to when the builder needs you on site, the more likely he is to agree to your contract terms. Because if you're a contracts administrator working for a building company, you've got to go through what's called an authority to let process. And it's a big giant spreadsheet with everyone's due diligence checks, with a justification from the CA about why he wants that guy. And if the CA spent 2.5 weeks trying to let this trade, the last thing they want to do is undo it at the last minute. So there's this window where the CA will advocate for you to get you to be the guy to start on site. Now, if you start work on site without a contract signed, the leverage moves to the builder, because the builder will say to you, your payment's on hold until you sign the contract. And so how do you negotiate new terms then? Because you want to be paid. So he's got your money now. One of the best things you can say in that moment is, hey, our insurance policies don't apply unless we've got a signed contract. So we can't start until the contract is signed and we've sent it to our broker. Can't do it. And suddenly the CA will go, oh, well, I need your insurance. It's like, you need to have insurance. And, that's one way to do it. And I know a few brokers who will give you an email to wheel out in that situation as well, if that's an issue. But once you do start work on site without a contract, it comes down to the payment problem. And it also comes down to what are the terms of my contract. So if you have a signed squared away contract, and when I say signed squared away, I'm not just talking about you sign it and send it back to the builder, because the CA will make a billion changes, upload it to Procore silently and never say a word. And you don't even know what the contract terms are. You need to have it back, countersigned in your records file, so that you know what the terms are. So that's what I mean, a squared away contract. But if you start work on site without the signed contract, does your quote apply, or does the contract they offered you apply? Or is it a monster mash of both? Or is it common law? Or are we agreeing later to more terms? So there's actually 4 categories in the common law world. I'm not going to go into that because everyone will go to sleep driving listening to this. But it's effectively a situation of being able to prove, and lawyers will lawyer the absolute hell out of it while they're trying to work out whether you're entitled to be paid. You'll also spend another $10,000 to $15,000 if you have to debt recover trying to argue what your contract terms are. And it's just not worth it. It's just, in no view is it worth it. And the builder will be hopefully thanking you, because you'll be predictable, and they'll know that, hey, if we send this over to you a week out, we'll have our departures sorted out, you'll have the contract squared away, and my boys will be on site. I actually think the reason subbies do this is because they've got resources on standby for the job that they just need to get to a job that day. And they're just going, no, I just want these boys on a site so that I can start charging for them. But overlooking the fact that this is a $10,000 to $30,000 problem that you're creating just to get in the door, to get somebody to decide whether or not you've got a contract.
For sure. I guess one of the things on that, a bit of an extension to there, is the subcontractor of the subcontractor of the subcontractor of the subcontractor. Head contracts. It's one of those things that they put those provisions in to subcontractors to the subbies, saying, "Oh, you've got to meet the conditions of the head contract," but we can't show you the head contract.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question on that? Sort of, what's your stance on those things?
Yeah, it's so funny. Look, I've actually phoned builders CAs helping subbies in the past, and I've said, hey, can you email me a copy of the head contract? No, you've got to come to the office to read it. What? Can I take photos of it? No. Can I take notes? No. So you expect me to commit the head contract to memory? Well, we can't give it pages. We can't give it to you because it's a confidentiality issue. Well, that doesn't fly because you want me to comply with it. How can I comply with it if it's confidential? And I've just said to these guys, what you're actually saying is, it's not important to you at all that I comply with it. You're putting it in there to try and hold me to standards outside of my own contract that I don't even know what they are. So I'm sorry, but we're going to have to cross it out if you can't give me a copy. But if you just give me a copy, we can knock up our template notices with the timeframes that all apply with the head contract, so we can help you administer this contract. Because it's funny, there's such a disconnect with lawyers these days. This is such a bugbear of mine, Warren. I have to confess, I don't think of myself as a lawyer in the first person. I think of myself as a construction industry person that's also a lawyer. So I pay out on lawyers a lot, but look, what they do is they put these overly onerous provisions into contracts that are so far removed from actually getting the outcome desired. So for example, give me a notice of delay within 2 business days, and it has to say 15 things. So they make it so impossible for a subby to actually give you a notice of delay that no one's going to give one. And if the outcome desired is to actually get told when there's an issue so they can remove the delay so everyone can get on with building, then they should make it possible for us to be able to do those things. So yeah, the head contract, tied into the head contract business, is a little bit of a touchy one. Thankfully, I think it was 2015, there was a High Court case where they said that if you are making payment under a construction contract contingent upon a third-party contract, i.e. the head contract, that's a pay when paid provision, and it will be void in the contract. So now when you look at defects liability periods and whether you can reach practical completion or whether that's stitched up to head contract as well, those provisions, if you are using adjudication, are able to be considered void.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so it shouldn't hold up your payment.
It's interesting because we're still seeing these practices from the tier ones down, of just this. I don't like to use the word bullying, but they've just become so good at the contract management of getting subbies, to sign up to things that are just, they have no idea what they're really signing into. And the poor old subby at the end of the line, they just don't have the resources, to hire the legal departments. Almost, it's not just a single lawyer; it's a department of lawyers to argue their case, and these are the guys that can least afford it. In the process, it's it's interesting what's happening out in the industry.
Yeah, look, it is. That's actually our model. So that's where Tricks of Your Trade tries to bring those affordable services to subcontractors. So we don't give you legal advice. We know you don't want to hear it, to be honest. You don't want to hear the black and white letter of the law reasons why something can't be done. What you want is step 1, step 2, step 3 on how to get from A to B and not tank your deal, but still protect your risk. So we do a contract review risk assessment with you. And we have the Subbies Toolbox, which is a membership, which is a low cost monthly fee where subbies can be involved with that and get access to me 2 days a week. But also we do that contract risk review service as well. So it doesn't have to be a team of lawyers. And there's only been 2 times ever that we've had a client not sign a contract. One of them was because we did due diligence checks and the builder had only been around for 6 months and was owned by a bunch of Pty Ltd companies and was asking for 21 grand a day liquidated damages. And it was the client who said, now that I notice I don't even need the review, I'm just going to say no. And another time we had a guy who we did a lot of negotiating with the builder, and the builder just came back and was just arbitrarily, no, this to stay. And they were really, really horrible terms. And the subby said, look, I've got the option to do this other job. But it was a conversation of, look, if you take this job, there's going to be risk. And if you want to take it on, you really need to have a good margin in there because it's got to be worthwhile. But think about it, if you're stitched up on this job for 1.5 years and it's this much of a nightmare, think of all the other jobs you could have taken in that time that you now aren't going to have the resources to send to.
Absolutely. One of the things that we talk about here with business owners, trade business owners, is mental bandwidth, protecting your mental bandwidth. And so if you're doing works that are really high touch, where the owner or senior supervisors need to give it 110% of their attention because of the contract terms or the type of work it is, that's really one of those things that they need to consider in the risk element is, do I really want to do this job? So onerous contractual terms on it that you could lose everything, is it just it makes sense to go, look, on that one we'll walk away.
Yeah, definitely.
Next question I want to talk about is, what's the worst situation you've seen a subcontractor find themselves in about contracts and so forth like that? You could probably come up with a number of ones here, nightmare stories, but hit us with a couple of examples.
Okay. So probably the 2 biggest ones. One was because we had a guy who started on site without signing his contract, and the price was still being negotiated, and there was a couple of value propositions that were put forward. And so what happened was the CA said to him, can you drop some materials on site so we can include it in our head contract claim and we'll get you paid for it? So he didn't even think, I'm starting on site. He just dropped like a couple of $100 grand worth of materials on site, thinking this was going to be a favor to the builder. And 1.5 years later, the progress claims just stopped, and the CA came back and said, no, you've reached your contract sum. We don't have any more to pay you. And he's like, what do you mean my contract sum? And he hadn't been reading his payment schedules. In fact, he'd only received 2 payment schedules, like for the whole period. And suddenly he realized that his contract sum was an amount that he hadn't agreed to. It was a number that had never been mentioned. So it looked to us as if what the CA had done is put in like an interim contract sum amount in their GEOP system pending what the contract sum would be. And of course, because a year had gone by, the builder's cost reporting was showing margins at a certain amount, and it was probably 40% shy of where it needed to be. So it was a big amount of money. So this guy had to have an adjudication, and it was really distressing for everyone because the subcontractor had a really good bond with the CA. The CA went to ground, literally was hiding from the subby on the site, and our guy would ring him and he could see him up on a balcony, and the guy was hiding, trying to get away from
Oh no!
This guy. So it was a really emotional situation. And then once the subby was successful in adjudication, the builder came back and said, look, I don't have this money. And there had to be a big sort of cut a deal type scenario so that the builder didn't fold and the subby got paid something. And that was probably the worst situation, and all could have been avoided, but it was, that's one scenario. Another scenario, we've got a couple of clients at the moment who are stuck under contract, and this is the situation with material price increases and not being entitled to delay costs under your contract. So they've signed a contract 1 year or 2 ago, and the builders made major design changes, and our guy was involved with helping with that. And some of the things got paid as a variation, but others didn't. But because the rates and amounts in the contract for variation pricing are 1.5 years old, our guy's making a loss on this, and the job is evolving. So it's a really big commercial job. He's spent an extra year on site, not entitled to delay costs. The builder doesn't have any more money to give because it was a design and construct. So our guy was a construct only, builders a design and construct. the principal saying, you said you'd make me this pretty building that, you know, we had in the concept drawings, get it done. And, you know, that's a situation where those guys, they could lose $500,000 over a contract, and whether you've got a subcontracting business that can absorb that kind of loss, but very little that can be done under the contract. And, you know, if anyone's going to push the envelope on that much money, it's going to have to be a court situation. So these are the types of things where, and those guys early on, I was saying to them, look, you need to be giving your notices of delay and claiming your delay costs now. And they said, we don't want to rock the boat with the relationship, not knowing it was going to be a year-long delay. And, you know, by the time they finally said, we need some money for this, it was too late. They were time barred. And so those are the things that can go wrong. And I think subbies think of contract administration as sort of dirty laundry, or it's like homework, right? No one really wants to do it. And I always say to them, look, if you need help with this stuff, there's a way that you can have a systematic approach so that it's not a huge administrative burden on your jobs. But if you don't spend the upfront money, because this is the thing, and I'm sure you've probably heard this term too, but my business coach said the other day that people like to spend money on hopium. They don't like to spend money on negative things. They always want the hopium, right? Which is, I think, is why trade business coaches are like got a really good niche, because they're selling the hope of more revenue. But if it feels bad to spend money on admin, imagine how bad it feels to spend the money when you haven't been paid in 3 to 6 months and you don't have the money to pay for the debt recovery process. The problem has gone from this big to this big. You can't see that because you're on a podcast, but this big. And all of a sudden, you know, you've got a 10x bill on what it would have cost you to have just done this stuff in the first place. And I've been in a situation where I've had subbies sending notices of delay, and I didn't ring them up and say you're being contractual and get upset with them. It actually was good to know that they were competent enough to administer their contract, for one, but it also builds trust, because if you're predictable, if every single time you do things exactly the same way, then you're training the builder to understand that this is the way you operate and they can rely on you. It builds trust. So by all means, we've seen builders, project managers say, please stop sending these notices. This is so stressful. And we've said, well, can you put that in an email for me, please? And we've effectively been released from having to do all of that. But yeah, there's a balance to be struck. But if you don't do something early on, or at least take away the big stressful cloud above your head of what am I signing up to? I don't even know what to do if something went wrong. If you can take that stress off your shoulders, then I think if you are growing your revenue, then this is the way to do it. Is if you want permission to grow your revenue from a business coach, get one from a lawyer as well that tells you that the risk is not is not going to sink your business.
Michelle, it's interesting that one of the words you mentioned there is about consistency, and that is something that we look at here. You know, and I heard years ago, in business and in life, if you are not consistent, you are non-existent.
That's
you know, that come from like 100-year ago quote, and it's so relevant today. Is you don't even have to do things that well, but if you consistently do things to the best of your ability and have that process, whether it's, you know, contract administration, getting these delay notices or feedback to clients, you have to have that consistency in business. Otherwise, you just lose. Another thing that you know, we talk about a lot is all the eggs in one basket. You know, you're trying to do a lot of these things for different clients, but your client mix, if you've got too much exposure to the one builder, and even though you might go, look, they're just offering this so much work, there's so much work ahead of us, and, you know, let's just get going. And then before you know, you could have 95% of all your work through that one source and all those payment cycles. So, you know, in terms of that's a risk in itself. So that's one of the things that we talk about is, you know, it's very easy to go down those lines, but it's that risk management, not only contracts, but client risk. Have you got too much with the one builder, even though it's, you know, the resistance is non-existent, you know, you can work there and there's plenty of opportunity. At some point in the future, it could burn you. And hey, I've been guilty of that myself, and it bites, and it bites hard, and it hurts.
Look, I think the 80-20 rule's got to sit somewhere, doesn't it? Because Pareto wouldn't have had a principle without the 80-20 rule. But we've had clients in the past who have spent all of it. The director of big companies turning over more than $1 million a month, and these directors are spending all their time from the 15th of the month to the end of the month going to BS meetings to fight for their money. And at one point I said to one of these guys, have you noticed that from this particular builder, every single payment schedule values down what you claim by 20%, almost to the 0.01 decimal point? And he sort of looked at me and I said, that's actually a directive in building companies that gets given quite a lot, where if cash flow is going to be tight, they will send something out to the CAs to say, which one of these subbies can we get away with not paying? We need to pick up 20% on every claim this month. And I used to, as a CA, always say, why don't we have a look at our suppliers first who actually have longer accounts than the subbies and let the subbies get paid? But it is actually an indication sometimes that the builder's got bigger problems. So you need to be watching that kind of conduct. And if you are spending all of your time with headaches, there's that old price transition shock theory as well, where maybe you're pricing in the tar pit and you are getting the crappy builder from the bottom of the barrel every single time. And mate, stop and think about, is there a reason this guy keeps giving you all his work? And is it because you're getting 20% of every payment claim short paid? Or is he ripping you off on the varies? Or is he holding your attention for 2.5 years because you keep forgetting to claim it? What is it that you're doing? Why are you so great that he's giving you all this work?
One of the things that we talk about with contractors is, if you want to price high and work for the premium builders, you have to be a premium contractor.
Yes.
And a lot of it is, okay, I do good work, but, our discussion this morning, Michelle, it's really about, no, have you got your house in order? Are you engaging people like yourself? And your services seem very reasonable in price to offer clients to get the education they need around contract management. And dealing as a subcontractor or trade business owner it's not just doing the trade. It's your sales process, your marketing, your administration, your project management, your legal risk profile, all that sort of thing you need to consider. That's just part of doing good business and being a premium contractor.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true.
I want to ask a question now is, for anyone listening, is if you had to give one piece of advice to get people really a jolt to say, what do we need to really consider when it comes to, contract administration working, what would that advice be?
One of the things that I think at the moment is really topical is the price wars situation. And the best advice that I can give in that regard is, I understand that you want to win as much work as possible, but in the model that we've got, and you hit it bang on the head, Warren, with the way that in Australia we do projects, builders don't actually build, they do project management, and that involves slicing up a big head contract into trade packages. So it is a statistical liability, a statistical probability that you will have a dispute. And somebody can do the maths on it, I'm sure, based on the number of subcontracts and what the head contract's got going on. But there are so many variables that can reduce your risk profile with that. So you need to be aware that when you price a job at tender for a builder, that price the builder gives the principal goes to the bank. And then it's a project viability price. So if the bank is saying to the principal, yes, you can build this hospital or this school or, this apartment building for this price, and you are underpricing to be the lowest guy on the thing, or to help the builder win the job, which is something that we used to ask subbies, like, don't give us a project price afterwards, give us your best price now at tender, and we won't ask you for a discount because we really want to win it. But those guys would underprice at tender, and then suddenly we would win the job and they'd say, oh, we can't do that. We can't do it anymore, or we missed this, or something like that. So we have, as subcontractors, at the bottom of the contractual chain, we have a sense of responsibility over builder insolvency and principal insolvency as well. And you really are able to change the landscape for your trade if you guys can work together on this. Now, you need to be really careful because we have anti-competitive laws for competition and consumer in Australia, and what you can't do is you can't fix prices, do cover pricing, you can't collude together to have a square metre rate. What you need to know is your numbers, and I suppose that's where you come in, Warren. I can't count to save myself, but instead of going, right, a roofer should be charging this much per square metre or this much per lineal metre for gutter or whatever it is, right, a blocky, rather than saying this should be the industry rate, you need to look inside your business model and go, what are my overheads? What does it cost me? What are my buy rates? And then what is my best price? And what will organically happen is that by pricing in that price point, you will find your unicorn client. So that's what the whole price transition shock model is based on. But we can't keep saying, look, we're victims of this, because in terms of the price wars, until price wars are gone, subbies are not victims of this situation. Another thing is obviously trade credit insurance. I always say contract works insurance policies are oxygen. Please, please, please have one, even if the contract doesn't require you to have one, because it will save you one day. But trade credit insurance policies are really good to have as well. And when you end up in a situation where your builder goes broke, you will probably hate paying your premium for your trade credit insurance for 10 years and you won't have a problem. But the year that something goes bad, your trade credit insurer, if you get the right policy, will pay you what, hopefully a percentage of what you're owed, your retention if you've got the right underwriting in your policy, and also will protect you against preference payments. Because if I've got a client who's been paid by their insurer for money they were owed by their builder who's broke, I'm much happier than if I've got a client who's been paid by their builder who went broke and now there's a liquidator fighting them over a preference payment. And I've seen tradies go broke where they're still short paid $500,000 from this builder that's gone broke, but the liquidator wants back that 180 grand that he got in the 6 months prior. And the subbie's saying to me, how can this even be happening? We're still owed all this money. So yeah, it's really important, I think, in terms of what's going on with the economy at the moment. We just can't do price wars anymore. We can't do it. And you guys are, sorry to be crude, but probably pooping in your own nest. And we have to take some responsibility for that.
Absolutely. It's I think it's a bit of a myth out there that, hey, I want to do better. I want to be more profitable. So, you know, the age-old answer is just, oh, we need to win more work. And, you know, one of the things, we've actually put a complete masterclass online talking about cash flow. Like, you know, it's one of those things, if you don't have cash, you can't pay bills. Mm-hmm. So it's really about your profitability has got to be greater than your capital expenditure in works in progress, as well as, you know, your working capital. And financial statements are so complex that the most people just don't understand them. So they just look at their profit and loss statement and they're not considering, you know, accounts payable, accounts receivable, terms and conditions of contracts, which affects all that sort of stuff. Yes. And we're very much in tune with the whole be a profit-driven contractor, and knowing the numbers of down to, you know, if you enter into an agreement, what does that look like from a cash flow perspective? And not only cash, is time for the owner, is how much time and attention, which I brought up earlier, is that mental bandwidth. How much is going to go into that contract that's going to take me away from the rest of the business? All of these considerations need to be there. And the one that you talked about there, just on the end, sorry, I've got a bit of a head cold. It's just catching up with me a little bit. But yeah, the preferential payments, most people have never heard of that. And I know a fellow a couple of years ago that got stuck with that, you know, $250,000 worth of preferential payments is what they said, and he still was owed a lot of money. It nearly sent him broke. Mm-hmm. And most people just can't sustain that. And it's just that knowing, you know, what can go wrong, the risk profile of a contract, that most trade businesses, particularly at the lower end, you know, everyday mum and dad businesses, probably, you know, people turning under 5 million would never have engaged in that sort of understanding with how that all works and how they can claw back money. And yeah, and it can devastate the lives of everyday people. So, you know, we're on a bit of a mission. I think we're on a similar mission as yourself, is just to get the awareness out there that, you know, price appropriately. If people are asking you to discount, understand what that's going to cost you. Yes. Know where you stand financially month on month. because it's so important for your family, for the people that are working for you, and ultimately your customers. If you're discounting, it's just no good for the industry, it's no good for customers or builders. So it's so important to know your numbers for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny, and I don't sell trade credit insurance, by the way. I don't get any kickbacks or commissions. I just am a fan, because when it first came out, I wasn't even finished my law degree. I was doing work experience for a law firm. And I remember the director of the law firm saying, "Have you heard of this new insurance you can get? Ha, 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 I wonder how long that'll last." And I immediately, after I started my business, started reading the policy terms and conditions. And I started recommending to subbies that this is not a good idea, because a lot of the things that they exclude in those policies, and you're going to be in breach of contract the moment you sign, adhere to this policy. So you're going to snooker yourself. You've got this policy. And back then the policies were about 45 grand a year. It was ridiculous. But they've made some big changes, and the policies are still around. So the insurers now have completely changed the way they deal with preference payments and retentions. And I think they're starting to recognise that if you suspend work under security of payment laws, which you're obliged to do under your terms and conditions of your policy to make sure that you're trying to get that money and you're doing everything possible, and you have to suspend services to your customer under the policy. But under security of payment laws, if you get paid, you have to go back to site within so many days, and you could be in breach of contract. You could end up being sued, and then the builder would have a real reason not to pay you. So I think these policies are starting to get better and better, but you need to know what you should ask for. So we have, and I'll send it to you as well if you want to put it in the show notes, but we've got a list of 10 questions you should ask your trade credit insurance broker before you buy a policy, to make sure you get the right underwritings for the type of work you're doing. Otherwise, it's quite possible, I can't speak for every broker out there, whether they'll sort you out. And a lot of the brokers now will send a monthly questionnaire to all of their insured saying, tell me which of your clients are longer than 60 days. So they make you do the reporting now, whereas when it first came out, they were sort of going, here's a policy, but you'll void it, no doubt, anyway, and we won't have to pay out under it. But now the brokers are really good at making sure they follow up to make sure that can't set and forget one of these policies. And typically now it's pretty rare that I hear people say that their policies cost them more than sort of 10 to 15 grand for the whole year for their revenue turnover. There will be, at the moment, because of the instability in the economy, there'll be people you just can't get cover on, but that's a really good way for you to find out if you're doing your due diligence checks. You can call a trade credit broker and say, can I get a policy on this person? It won't cost you anything to ask the question. And if they say no, you know what's going on.
Don't work for them, yeah.
And those guys have actually got the best real-time feedback. So one of the things I always daydreamed about when I first started law school was having a big list of people who don't pay. And the trade credit brokers have got it, because all the subbies out there with policies, the moment somebody doesn't pay them, they have to report. So those guys have got the data on who's not paying people. And there's actually brokers that you can get reports from who will tell you, and it's like a $50 report. It's not expensive.
So they're the Google of the insurance world, essentially gathering all the data on that. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Michelle, this has been great talking to you this morning. This is one of those topics that, as you mentioned earlier, it's not high on the radar for most trade businesses because it's all too overwhelming. And you've really brought some practical, no nonsense sort of discussion about it. So tell us, how can our listeners get more of this if they wanted to engage with you? What's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, for sure. So we actually have a podcast. So the Tricks of Your Trade podcast, you could just search it wherever you listen to podcasts, the Tricks of Your Trade podcast. We have got a webinar gallery on some topics on our website. So if you want to go to our website, www.tricksofyourtrade.com.au, you see at the tab at the top, there's a tab called Virtual Events. You go through the process. I do make you put your details in, just because people, otherwise I don't want to end up on a YouTube meme or whatever they call those things. So we do have to have a little security fence in there for that. But we do webinar topics probably 3 to 4 times a year. We used to do one every month and it just became too much and people wouldn't turn up as often. So we try to do one every 3 months on different topics. And if you guys have got topics, you can email me questions at tricksofyourtrade.com.au. you can email for a question, and I'll typically give people a 15-minute free consultation. If you give me a call and I've never spoken to you before, I'm not going to send you a $60 bill for my time. We're just keen to...
Was it $60 or $600?
No, well, see, Tricks of Your Trade is not a law firm, so we don't charge like lawyers.
That's fantastic to hear. Terrific. Michelle, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you this morning. Again, this is a really important subject. Knowing your numbers and knowing your legal risk and things like that. Trying to get awareness into the trades about this. What we're all trying to collectively do is just raise the standards. We're deeply concerned that it's subcontractors and tradesmen. It's the building blocks of our nation. And we're so committed to making sure that works, because if there's pressure around money and work stress and all these things, it just impacts negatively on our whole society. And there's what we're doing here, and what you're doing is, if it's adding that little bit of extra, it's really worthwhile. Really talented people that can visualize a job and do a job are always going to be game changers. They're always going to win contracts, irrespective they've got the business mindset behind it. How do we change that? I don't know. So I think that's always going to be there. But I think through education, it's like any society, it's really, education is where everything starts. The more educated and the easily digestible that is of risk and reward, and how it could be, we bend people's reality that way.
I do think that in terms of, and it happens with lawyers, it happens with chefs, like where you've got those apprentice-based roles where people have to be the underling for so many years and do the shit jobs before they've earned their stripes, that the seasoned veterans are so hardened by the time they're 20, 30 years into their business. It's so difficult to get them to see that things could be done differently.
I'm always talking to tradesmen about is, as soon as you become a business owner, you give up the right to just be a tradesman.
Yes.
And if you're not willing to step up and be a businessman, on electrical licenses, you have to have a capable business person and a capable technical person to even get a license. But what does that mean? What does it look like? And it's all this stuff about understanding contracts and whatnot. And sadly, there's just not the education. Once people do a trade, they go, look, I'll have a crack. And we're trying to move in that direction. That how can we get our big business sort of experience into an easy digestible format, that people just get the nuggets that they need to go, oh, hang on, there could be some issue here. I need to protect myself. Love your work. Absolute pleasure. Thanks again. Do you have any other final words before we get off today?
Oh, I probably can't think of anything super smart to say right now, Warren. You've got me on the spot. Just never start work on site without the contract squared away is probably your first thing. And don't blindly sign your contracts. There's a way that you can have a checklist to review it yourself. We've got online training. We've got negotiation school coming up to help you guys with all of that. And it's all on our websites. So just head on over and have a look.
That's great. Thanks very much, Michelle. Much appreciated. And I'm sure our listeners will get great value out of this. Terrific. Thank you.
Thanks, Warren.